نحمده ونصلي على رسول الكريم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. It's Tuesday evening, the 8th of February. The time has just gone 8:54, and you on another Business Matters program with me, Anwar Moolla. Business Matters brought to you by the Minara Chamber of Commerce. We're going to have a bit of a shortened show tonight. We're going to go introduce our guests. And carry on till 9 o'clock. At 9 o'clock, we'll take the news and then carry on thereafter until 9:30. So without much further ado, let me just introduce our guest tonight. He's on the telephone with me, and his name is Ashraf Parker. Ashraf is joining us from Cape Town. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Al Ansar, our brother Ashraf Parker.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala, Brother Anwar, and to the listeners. Yes, I am on the line.
Okay, Ashraf, good to hear you. Thanks for joining us on Radio Al Ansar. A brief introduction to our guest, Brother Ashraf Parker. He is an attorney and conveyancer. His key areas of practices are conveyancing and deceased estates. Ashraf is also an EXCO member of AMAL, that's the Association of Muslim Accountants and Lawyers, Secretary General of the Black Conveyancers Association. He's a lecturer at the BTA Conveyancing Training Academy for Paralegals and the chairperson of the External Legal Advisory Board of Cape Peninsula University of Technology. That's quite a mouthful and an illustrious CV, Brother Ashraf. Well done to you, and tell us a little bit about yourself in terms of where you hail from and your early years and where you are today.
Jazakallah, Brother Anwar. I'm born and bred in Cape Town, still based in Cape Town.
I can hear that in your voice.
As the years has gone by, I've come to grow and network with a lot of practitioners in my field of study and expertise in the property field. Mostly from KZN as well as Gauteng and the Eastern Cape. And we all share the same passion for the property industry as well as law in general.
Okay. Ashraf, we're going to be focusing tonight on the Property Practitioners Act, a new piece of legislation that came into effect on the 1st of February. We're gonna focus on where the changes are and the implications of the changes. So can we start by saying, in a brief gist, what is the Property Practitioners Act?
Brother Anwar, basically, previously the property industry was governed by the Estate Agency Affairs Act of 1976, and government then over the last few years decided that we need an all-inclusive and encompassing act that will cover property practitioners, not merely estate agents, but property practitioners as well. And for that reason, a bill was published, and a lot of comment was received from practitioners and the public, and the Estate Agency Affairs Act has now officially been repealed, and the Act has been replaced by the Property Practitioners Act, which came into law on the 1st of February 2022. So, in effect, that is what the Act is entitled, and new regulations have been published in the Act. And the Act explains exactly which part, in the property industry it intends to cover. If I may just very briefly just touch on a few things. One of the reasons why the Act was established was for firstly, the establishment of a Property Practitioners Regulatory Authority. It is to provide for the definition, regulation, and licensing of property practitioners, to provide for the continuation of the Fidelity Fund, to provide for the protection and promotion of interests of consumers, to provide for dispute resolution in the property market, to promote the meaningful participation of historically at disadvantaged individuals in the property market, and as I said before, to provide for the repeal of the Estate Agency Affairs Act. So in essence, that is why this act has been promulgated and it's become law. And as we move on, I will explain certain of the definitions as to why the Act will provide for certain powers to govern people in the property industry.
Okay, Ashraf, my good friend Aslam Mayat is reminding me that I should state very clearly that you are an EXCO member of AMAL, the Association of Muslim Accountants and Lawyers. So I'm sure you have a very good relationship with him and most of the other lawyers in the Durban area.
Absolutely, brother Anwar. AMAL spread its wings to the Western Cape province and to Gauteng and to other areas as well. It was very active and still is very active in KZN. And over the last few years, I've enjoyed a very wonderful collegial working relationship with members, Aslam included, and other members of AMAL. And obviously, I have observed the enormous amount of work that they do, and by contributing of their time, there are a number of expert practitioners in different fields of law. Recently, the matrimonial property bill, wills and estates, etc., and the amount of time that they give to the public, simply words cannot justify. They are extremely dedicated, and this is rubbed off on other regions, especially in the Western Cape as well, where members give up their time. And we hope that they will continue to be a body that will fight and represent people who are previously disadvantaged individuals, as well as the public in general, to ensure that their rights are protected under the Constitution. But similarly too, because AMAL is an association of Muslim accountants and lawyers, to act and fight for its members in keeping with the Quranic, the dictates of the Quran, as well as the Sunnah of Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Ashraf, unfortunately, we've hit the 9 o'clock news time. I'm going to ask you to allow us the liberty to take the 9 o'clock news. I will call you back at about 10 past 9. And in terms of discussing the Property Practitioners Act, we'll start off by discussing who exactly is a property practitioner, and then unpack further the Property Practitioners Act. So if you could allow me, we'll take the news and get back to you at about 9:10.
Business Matters.
A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. If you've just joined us, welcome to the Business Matters program with me, Anwar Moolla. We had just stopped for the news break, and we were having an interesting discussion with Brother Ashraf Parker from Cape Town on the Property Practitioners Act. Ashraf, when we finished off, I said I'm going to ask you as soon as we get back if you can explain to us this act, who does it apply to, and what is the definition of a property practitioner?
Jazakallah, Brother Anwar. Basically, Section 1 of the Act contains various definitions, one of which is the definition of a property practitioner. This definition it's very broad and needs to be read and to be understood. It extends, according to the Act, to estate agents, those involved in sales, auction and letting, property leasing or property leasing managers, timeshare and fractional ownership sales, mortgage originators, bridging agents, and managers of a property practitioner business. So those are essentially, in terms of the Act, a definition of a property practitioner. It would appear that property valuers and inspectors, in particular those that work for the banks, have been excluded from the Act. But as I said, those are the parties that will fall under the definition of a property practitioner.
Okay, Ashraf, I think that's quite a wide range of people, and it covers most people in the property industry, including, as you said, people that are selling timeshare and fractional ownership. What may I ask is a Fidelity Fund certificate?
Yeah. Look, a Fidelity Fund certificate, so any person who earns a commission or a brokerage from the sale or the leasing of property must, according to the new Act, have a valid Fidelity Fund. Fidelity Fund is it's the equivalent of an insurance, and it's underwritten by the Fidelity Fund. Such a person or company must have a Fidelity Fund certificate, which must be produced on request from a seller or a landlord. So if you're contracting with one of the agents or one of the persons as defined in the Act, you're entitled to demand the production of a valid Fidelity Fund certificate. Previously, most estate agents were obliged, and they did have Fidelity Fund certificate, but I think the intention of this Act is to strengthen the governing and the rules around holding a Fidelity Fund certificate. It's actually tightened the regulations around the certificate beyond the current requirements, because the Act has now made provision that in order to obtain a Fidelity Fund certificate, you also need a valid tax certificate. And furthermore, as there's a further condition, you must also have a BEE certificate. And this is required that not just agents, but the agency or businesses and all of its property practitioners, they need to be fully compliant and have a Fidelity Fund certificate. So the Fidelity Fund certificate is, as I said, an insurance type of policy in the event of a consumer or a member of the public suffering a financial loss in the event of an act of dishonesty committed by a property practitioner. They, after action against a property practitioner, will then have a right of recourse against the Fidelity Fund, who will then entertain any claim that is laid against it if a property practitioner has misappropriated any funds which they held on behalf of a seller and or a purchaser.
Sure, that's very interesting, but something you touched on there, which is a BEE certificate. And I'm trying to look and say, a lot of the traditional estate agencies, and a few come to mind, but the ones here that are the bigger ones, for example, Wakefields or Rawsons or something, and I'm just using them as an example. If they have agents that are, I would say, kind of white, or how would this affect the ratings in terms of a BEE certificate?
Look, the BEE certificate, and I think the intention of the legislator around the aspect of BEE is one of the intentions of this Act is the Act itself provides for the property sector transformation charter, which will then apply to all property practitioners. And when procuring property-related goods and services, all organs of state will be obliged to utilize the services of property practitioners who complied with the broad-based Black economic empowerment and employment equity legislation and policies. The Act itself provides for the establishment of a property sector transformation fund, which will include as its purpose the promotion of Black-owned firms and principles, participation of the historically disadvantaged, and promotion of consumer awareness and consumer education and training. And to this effect, the regulations so far indicate that no more than 75% of the income of the fund must be used for various empowerment purposes referred to in currently Chapter 2 of the regulation. So, in essence, one of the, I think, requirements will be that when applying for a Fidelity Fund certificate, obviously you need to have a tax clearance certificate and you need to have a BEE clearance certificate. And the purpose of the Act is for and it being a regulator, is to actually champion the cause of transformation insofar as promoting and enhancing and educating previously disadvantaged individuals who are now active in the property sector. So that, in my view, is one of the intentions for a BEE certificate, also to be submitted with a tax clearance when you apply for your Fidelity Fund certificate.
So this Fidelity Fund certificate, Ashraf, if I may ask, is it going to be, is it the company that applies for this, or is it the individuals that work for the company that each have to have their own Fidelity Fund certificate?
To my understanding, I think a Fidelity Fund certificate, when a company applies for a Fidelity Fund certificate and it has directors, a Fidelity Fund certificate will normally be issued for each director of a company if they are property practitioners. And the Act, I think, has broadened it that even the agents who were previously called estate agents, they will now be called property practitioners or candidate property practitioners and principal property practitioners, because previously they were merely called estate agents. So I think the Act has broadened it that anybody who is who earns a commission or earns a fee in the property industry will have to apply for this Fidelity Fund certificate to be issued in their name, because you will be registered with the regulatory body which has been created in terms of this Act.
Okay, Ashraf, I'm going to use a practical example. I've been in Cape Town over the last week, and I'm inshallah going to be there again towards the end of this week, and maybe we can meet up when I'm there. But I'm trying to find an apartment in the Claremont area, for example, for my daughter who's going to be starting studies at UCT. And firstly, they're like hen's teeth to find. But most of the agents that I've been talking to, I would say 80 to 90% of them are white females. So when I'm looking at this Fidelity Fund certificate, some of these agents could have been selling property for the last 15 or 20 years. If I'm going to ask them for a Fidelity Fund certificate, the fact that they are white, would it mean that they're not going to qualify for the Fidelity Fund certificate?
No. I don't think that the Act is going to be discriminatory. I think because there's certain targets that the regulator, and I think the Minister of Human Settlements will still publish it. There's going to be certain, I think, transformation targets that's going to be set. You are absolutely correct. The property industry, sadly and regretfully, has lagged behind in transformation, in the transformation sector. It is, unfortunately, predominantly dominated by the previously disadvantaged. These are challenges which our current black estate agents are still facing. And even in non-affluent areas where they have set up bases, they still tend to control the property industry and the property market. The same challenges also face black attorneys and people, conveyancers who specialize in property. They too face challenges where the mandates to attend to property transfers are still reserved and circulated amongst a few firms, and even mortgage bond instructions. And that's why originators have also been roped in. So I think at the end of the day, the regulator in making it compulsory for a BEE certificate, if the levels of BEE has not improved from, let's say, from 5 to 4 or to 3, they're going to find it difficult. Firstly, insofar as governmental work is concerned, I think government will eventually allocate wherever they use estate agents, whether for auction of land or to lease land. They're going to look at agent or property practitioners, as it is now called. Those with a level 1 BE certificate are probably going to benefit from this particular bout of legislation. Okay,
excellent. Ashraf, that brings me to a point of, would there be any exams or any courses that would have to be attended by these practitioners for them to qualify for this Fidelity Fund certificate?
I think, as I said before, practitioners, they were, as they're now being called, most of them were obviously estate agents, so they would have obtained the relevant qualifications in the estate agency fields. So because they are practicing in their field of choice, they will be entitled to apply for a Fidelity Fund certificate, but now obviously with the added requirement of a valid tax clearance certificate and also a BEE certificate. So to answer your question, I think candidate property practitioners or candidate estate agents, they will obviously still be required to complete the relevant exams and to qualify to be independent property practitioners for their own account once they have successfully completed their course.
Okay. If you've just joined us, you're on the Minaria Chamber of Commerce Business Matters program with me, Anwar Moolla. And we're talking about the Property Practitioners Act with Brother Ashraf Parker from Cape Town. And if you want to pose any questions to Ashraf or contribute to the program in any way, the number in the studio is 0861904904. And if you want to choose to WhatsApp your questions, it's 060-904-1056. That's 060-904-1056. And we're having an interesting discussion regarding the Property Practitioners Act with Brother Ashraf Parker, absolutely knowledgeable and throwing light on this. Ashraf, if I may carry on and ask you about what type of property defects are covered by this act?
Yeah, look, previously, it was common cause when agreements of sales or leases were concluded. There was a defects form, which a seller would sign. It was more a comprehensive property defects, although, I think by and large, many deeds of sales, many agreements of leases did not even contain a defects disclosure. The Act, however, has now introduced what we call a mandatory or compulsory element that both sellers and landlords need to be aware of. As I said, for some time, it was just best practice to include a comprehensive property defects disclosure as part of a property transfer or a property lease. But now, in terms of the Act, it has become mandatory and compulsory for all property sale and lease agreements. So, a property practitioner may not accept a mandate from a seller or a landlord without this document, because this property defects disclosure document will then form part of the sale and lease agreement. And I think to add to it, failure to do so can render the contract per se null and void, number one. And number two, it can also lead to a property practitioner, even though he or she successfully concluded a sale or a lease, not being entitled to claim any commission of whatsoever nature from the seller or the landlord at the time that they had concluded such an agreement of sale or lease without the mandatory property defects disclosure document. So that has been a very important change in the legislation. And I think practitioners are both, even in the legal field, are still scratching their head because there's no clear disclosure form that has been promulgated as such, and firms are entitled to draft. There is one in terms of the Consumer Protection Act, but I think given within time, there will be a standard form that will be published and will be shared, I think, amongst practitioners as a guideline. And the public and property practitioners in particular would be well advised to try and gain knowledge by consulting and even attending webinars, for that matter, so that they can gain more knowledge and a bit of more information on this property defects disclosure document.
In that respect, I know there's an upcoming webinar that you're going to be part of that's under the auspices of AMAL, and then we're going to talk a little bit about that just now before we close up the program. We've got a few minutes left, and I firstly need to ask you, who is the new Board of Authority?
So the new Board of Authority, as I said, it was previously the Estate Agency Affairs Board. That Board of Authority has now been replaced, and it's now, in terms of the Act, it's called the Property Practitioners Regulatory Authority. So the Property Practitioners Regulatory Authority has replaced the Estate Agency Affairs Board.
Okay. So if I have a complaint, or if something is not quite right in terms of my negotiations and what I've concluded, who is it that I turn to?
Well, I think the Act, and bear in mind the Act is only about 8 days old. The provision has been made for inspectors, to be appointed to investigate any potential breach of a property practitioner of the Act. That's the first thing. And the Act itself is also going to make provision for mediation to take place, whereby disputes can be settled. So there's a vast number, because one of the primary reasons, that this act was for the protection of consumer interest, and with compulsory mediation intended to be part of the act, the consumer would be able to lodge a written formal complaint on affidavit to the regulatory authority, and I think each region will have officers, and they will then investigate the nature of the complaint and obviously engage with the property practitioner, and then ultimately they could refer to mediation, they could refer to a disciplinary body, etc., etc. And in that way, the consumer's interest will be protected, and they will then definitely have a right of recourse.
Okay, with that in mind and with a few minutes left, can you tell us something about the upcoming webinar that is being held, and how does one register for this webinar?
Yes, the webinar is due to take place this coming Saturday. The webinar is being, and I think this is one of the first webinars that AMAL is now hosting, but it's also, I think, one of the first major webinars on the Property Practitioners Act. And the Exco of AMAL decided on this simply because it's still a grey area. It's a new act, and I think there's a lot of uncertainty. There's panic in certain instances, and the Exco of AMAL felt that we should host a webinar. We've managed to obtain the services of an expert, Marina Botha, who's currently a lecturer at the Gawie Leroux course, where she lectures on the Property Practitioners Act. So inshallah, this coming Saturday at 10 a.m., a webinar will be hosted by AMAL in collaboration with Al Baraka Bank. And the cost, it's absolutely free. It's free to any member of the public, but more so the people who I defined, or the Act defines as property practitioners. And in order to register for this particular webinar, it will start at 10 a.m. It will continue for about 1.5 hours, and then there will be about a 30-minute time period for questions and answers. Already we've had a number of requests flowing in from, and this is the webinar is also even aimed at banks, because they themselves are in the property space and they deal with agents and conveyancers and originators on a daily basis. So even people from the members of the banking fraternity, have already made inquiries to attend. To join, like I said, it's absolutely free. All they need to do is they need to send an email to info@amal. So an email must be sent to info@amal to register, info@amal.co.za, and the applicant will receive a confirmatory mail containing information about joining the webinar.
Excellent. And I'm just going to add to that the AMAL office number. It's 031-207-3381. And I repeat that, 031-207-3381. And that email address again, it's info@amal.co.za. Ashraf, with that, I have to take leave. And I thank you for joining us tonight, for casting your a brief outlook of the Property Practitioners Act. I'm sure the webinar that's going to take place will be much more in depth and will cast a hell of a lot more in terms of what this act entails. But something that sure all estate agents and people that working in banks, working with property, anybody related to property would be very interested in and should partake of.
Jazakallah, Brother Anwar, and shukran to all the listeners for listening to me. We hope to receive many of you applying and emailing the AMAL email address to join us this coming Saturday, inshallah. And Brother Anwar, if you're in Cape Town, you have my number. Please feel free to look me up.
Okay.
Jazakallah, shukran jazilan wa akhi dawana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam, Brother Ashraf Parker, and I'm going to join you for kursus on a Sunday morning. That's the Cape tradition, inshallah. So yes, please feel free to join the AMAL seminar discussing the Property Practitioners Act. I think Brother Ashraf Parker has given us a lot to digest in those few minutes. With that, I'm going to take leave of you for inshallah for tonight, and we'll be back with you inshallah next Tuesday evening with another Business Matters program and another interesting guest that will cast some light on some thing related to either property or business that will be of benefit to the listeners of Radio Al Ansar. With that, it's wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.